Hello everyone and welcome to The No Show. I'll be your host Nathan Orenstein, and today I'm going to be reviewing Wicked for Good. Wicked for Good is written by Winnie, Holzman, and Dana Fox, directed by Jon M, and stars Cynthia Erivo, Ariana Grande, Jonathan Bailey, Ethan Slater, Marissa Bode, Michelle Yeoh, and Jeff Goldblum. Set a few years after the events of Wicked, Elphaba, now known as the Wicked Witch of the West, lives in hiding while continuing to battle for animal rights. Meanwhile, Glinda, now known as Glinda the Good, is serving as a sort of spokesperson for the Wizard of Oz. Things come to a head when Elphaba returns to the Emerald City to confront the wizard again. Wicked for Good is a sequel to 2024's Wicked. Alright, let's take a second to establish some context for this film and for this review. Wicked for Good is a sequel to 2024's Wicked, a film I saw a couple of times and that I thought was pretty good. Wicked and Wicked for Good serve as a two-film adaptation of the musical Wicked, which I am not familiar with. The musical is based on the novel of the same name, which I am also not familiar with. The novel is a sort of reimagining / expansion of the film / novel The Wizard of Oz, which I have indeed seen. All this to say, I am not familiar with the source material for this film specifically, but I do know what happened in the last film, and I did understand the many tie-ins to The Wizard of Oz here. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's get into the review. Point blank, I think Wicked for Good is unfortunately a worse film than Wicked in pretty much every way imaginable. I'll start with things I did think were better this time around though. For one, I thought the movie overall looked better than the first one did. The setting isn't limited to the school this time around, and the expansiveness of Oz looks really great here. The colors pop, and the world just has a much more authentic look and feel to it. I also thought, somehow, that Cynthia Erivo managed to outdo herself and truly put on a show-stopping performance. Wicked for Good has a much darker and more serious tone than the first film, and I think this created the perfect environment for her to really become this powerful and imposing character. And of course, her singing is still incredible. Outside of those two things though, I thought Wicked for Good felt downgraded in many ways and left me feeling a bit disappointed. My biggest gripe is with the story, both in the narrative itself and the way that narrative is presented to us. Let's start with the actual story though. Part of the reason why I wanted to establish my background with the source material up front is because I wanted to show that I don't really have a comparison point between this film and the novel or the musical Wicked, so I don't really know what's new here and what isn't. What I do know is I just wasn't crazy about the story here, particularly in how it ties in with The Wizard of Oz. This is, of course, a problem when kind of the main point of Wicked is to establish context for The Wizard of Oz. It felt like it was going out of its way to explain things from that film that really didn't need explanation, and it all just kind of got in the way of actual storytelling. This movie also starts, like I said, a few years after the events of Wicked. Really all this does is it allows these characters to be put into the roles that they need to fill so that the story has a chance at working. Let me give you a couple examples. Do we know how Glinda became this sort of good witch? No. Do we know how Fiyero became the captain of the Wizard's Guard? Also no. But these roles are important for the story, so we just kind of have to accept it. And despite this time skip, the characters all sort of behave as if no time has passed between the two films. I won't spoil exactly what I mean and how that manifests itself, but it felt weird, and it really did feel like a cop-out for them to skip this far ahead without any sort of explanation. As I mentioned, I also take issue with how the narrative is presented. And what I mean by that is how this is paced like a train going 1,000,000 miles per hour, going from plot point to plot point without any time to breathe. Let's compare this to the first film. Wicked was nearly 3 hours long and really didn't have all that much of a plot. There definitely was one, don't get me wrong, but so much of that film was spent setting up the characters and the world and the conflicts and whatever else. If anything, it was probably too indulgent and was longer than it needed to be to achieve what it was going for. Now we have Wicked for Good, which is a film that has absolutely no interest in slowing down and building characters or providing context for any of the plot points it hits. It just bulldozes through with really the only breathing room coming in the form of the musical numbers, which, simply put, are not as strong or as memorable as the ones in the first film, at least in my opinion. It does admittedly make for a runtime that slips by pretty quickly, but at what cost? I already mentioned that I don't think this story is all that great, and now it's being presented as a series of bullet points rather than an actual film. It's just a strange 180 with the pacing, and it's kind of shocking that this was written and directed by the same people from the first one. Overall, Wicked for Good did leave me feeling pretty disappointed, even as someone who wasn't necessarily head over heels for the first one. Wicked did a good job of setting everything up, only for Wicked for Good to come in and burn it all down as quickly as it possibly could. I do think the massive budget production-ness of it all does keep this afloat, with mostly strong performances across the board, led by a career-defining performance by Cynthia Erivo. And it's still pretty entertaining, especially because of the breakneck pace that never lets things get stale. But the story and how it was presented to us combined to really drag this thing down as a whole. While it's still a fine movie, it really should have been a lot better. I'm going to be giving it a 6 out of 10. If you enjoyed the review, then feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. And if you've seen Wicked for Good already, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I've been Nathan Orenstein with The No Show. Thanks for watching.